Hi everyone, once again. Right now I have Tim Messerschmidt, the Regional Developer Relations Team Lead in DACH region from Google. Was it right?
That's correct.
Okay, I was worrying a bit. Today we are having interviews with some of the speakers, and you're from Google, obviously. There are a bunch of people from Google here, but you have a special developer relations position. I'm a developer myself, and I've heard about developer relations teams, but what do they do?
All right, so what does developer relations do? That's actually a question that we obviously hear quite a lot.
Yeah.
Truth is, depending on the company you work for, developer relations has different functionality. That could be anything from working with very high-profile partners, down to giving lots of talks at conferences, towards attracting talent for your company, right? At Google, we have different developer relations teams with different functionality. My role at Google as developer relations lead is making sure that we keep in touch with the community, that we make sure that developers have access to the latest and greatest that Google builds, and especially that we actually get feedback from developers and bring it back to Google. Because we obviously want to make sure that we don't just build something that we think is great, that we want to actually build something that people love, right?
Yeah.
And the way that we do that is literally going to conferences, spreading the word, getting feedback, bringing it back to the product teams, and making sure that we iterate as often as we can.
Yeah.
And obviously, we understand that it's really important to put our faces out there so people know who to talk to whenever they might have problems or they simply just want to talk to somebody. So that's us.
And like later they open Stack Overflow or something and they see kind of same people answering questions?
Yeah, so at Google, we have a few different people that very much focus on different channels. So you might find people that appear a lot on Stack Overflow, but usually don't speak at conferences. But also you see people that do both. Like a great example, for instance, is Firebase. If you are into Firebase, you will definitely have met Frank from Puffalin at a conference before. But he's also the #1 person replying to things on Stack Overflow, right? So it's a good mixture of both, I guess. So for us, also a thing that we do is, for instance, we work with Google developer groups, and we work with the Google developer experts. So that focus on community, making sure the community has the latest access to resources, they know what we would like to focus on. That is something that we also take care of.
Cool. And like, do you focus on some specific on some specific technology, or I don't know, like backend, Node.js, Android, iOS, or what's your area of interest or something?
So for me, my area of interest kind of shifts back and forth because I've worked for PayPal before, and at PayPal I first did mobile development, and then I switched to a Node.js team. So I started doing lots of Node.js architecture work and those kind of things. That's also how I got into security, because that was a big deal for PayPal being a bank.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too weird, right? And then when I switched to Google, obviously because of the broad range of products, you will find that there are developer relations teams that purely focus on a single product. But even if you look at products at Google and product areas at Google, like for instance cloud, they have more than 60 to 70 different tools. So you will find somebody at cloud that focuses on machine learning, and then you have somebody that focuses on big data, and then somebody might focus on Kubernetes, for instance. Whereas I work for a team that we call a central developer relations team. I get to play with all the cool things, so which is something that I really enjoy. So I can play with Firebase, I deal with the cloud people a lot. I speak about Flutter a lot because I work with the Flutter team personally. So for me, the focus is a pretty general one, even though now that I work with Flutter, it very much, again, shifts to mobile.
And you mentioned security. And when I was building mobile apps, like developers try to think about security, but quite often they kind of forget stuff. I don't know, how should developers make their apps more secure, or should they think more about security?
So should developers think more about security? Definitely. I think security is oftentimes one of those topics where you notice a lot of companies care about security when it's too late. That's oftentimes like if you drive a car and you are really, really fast and you're getting a ticket for speeding, afterwards you're actually thinking more cautiously,
Yeah,
right?
true.
And it's the same with companies that they tend to often think about security when it's actually too late already, right? Oh, our database leaked. Maybe we should secure it more, or like all these different things. For mobile development, we often recommend people to actually use existing solutions that are out there already. Security is very hard, and unless you have enough resources to actually have people that are very much dedicated to look after your app security or backend security, there are actually great tools out there, so you don't actually have to build it yourself. Good example is obviously using file-based authentication, which takes care of a lot of these things, like how do I log in people that come from social accounts, like Facebook or Google or Twitter, or how do I actually do a password reset flow, right? Which means I have to store that password somewhere, and all these other things, which sounds like an easy to do thing, but nowadays we target web, we target Android, we target iOS. So I build these things oftentimes not just once, but actually up to 3 or 4 times, depending on how many platforms I want to target. And suddenly something that might be easy turns into a very complex thing. And obviously we have to keep up with security because, of course, it turns out a certain version of a database is not secure anymore, or all these other things. And a lot of companies like Google, we hire dedicated people that look after these things. So we make sure people that use those products actually benefit from all these latest developments and actually don't have to kind of think about that as much as if they build it themselves.
Yeah, like that's a good point about like having enough capacity to do that.
Yes.
Here you had a talk which is called like hands-on Flutter.
Yep.
Flutter is quite a new thing. Not that many people heard of it. Tell us more about Flutter. What's that?
So Flutter, you can imagine Flutter to be a UI toolkit, a mobile SDK that's built to allow developers, designers, and prototypers to quickly build applications that are extremely fast and really beautiful. And we've released the alpha of Flutter in May 2017. Like and ever since...
Google I/O?
Around Google I/O, exactly.
Yeah.
And what we tried making sure is that we always reach out to developers, get feedback, and prioritize features that we should be implementing based on what do people really need, right? Because, of course, if you work within a company, you have internal clients that tell you what they need in order to build apps. But it's really important because Flutter is actually completely open source to make sure it is really relevant to everyone. That people that are looking for a solution like Flutter actually get what they are looking for. So Flutter allows me to build applications written in Dart that target both Android and iOS.
Okay. Wow, so like I can use Dart like to write kind of front-end code.
Yep.
And then like with Flutter I can do it right now cross-platform on both iOS and Android.
Exactly. So the beauty is there is like with a lot of these cross-platform frameworks that we have nowadays.
Like we're using J2 Objective-C inside.
Like those kind of things. You usually have a VM, and then you have an interpreter that kind of compiles code from A to B, and you lose a lot of the performance, right? Because every time, like whenever I stay in my language that the framework deals with, things are usually fast. But whenever then I actually work with the native platform, you lose a bit of that performance because things might have to be interpreted and actually have to be dealt with. The beauty of Flutter is it comes with its own renderer. And it actually gets Android side code to ARM code. And on iOS, we use LLVM. So again, Dart's code is actually turning into native code. And what we really do is, instead of, if you think about concepts like a virtual DOM tree that you have with a lot of these cross-platform frameworks, you have that virtual tree, and you update that tree, you make changes to the UI, then the application framework has to compare updates, and then the interpreter gets that over to the native platform. Because we on Flutter have our own renderer packaged in the APK or in your iOS app, what happens is actually there's no more comparing, there's no more of that. We actually directly render on the surface. And that's why it's really, really fast.
But what about, this means you have to build the whole UI toolkit yourself.
So the beauty is Flutter actually comes with all the widgets that you're working with.
Inside.
And all the widgets that you have, like, so the concept for Flutter is everything is a widget. So even even imagine you have a text and you want to center it. If you have ever worked with web development, you know that can actually be more challenging than it should be. In Flutter, you would be wrapping that text widget in a center widget, and that's it.
Okay.
There is no global layout system.
Okay.
Everything is local. So I just wrap widgets in widgets. I can extend widgets. I can build upon them.
Okay.
And some of these widgets we provide are more opinionated. So I have a suite of material design widgets, which allow me to work on material design apps as I would on Android. And the same we do on iOS. You can work with Cupertino, which is Apple's design language, and achieve beautiful applications on that side.
Okay.
And the beauty of that is, because these widgets are implemented in Flutter, we can make sure the experience is always really smooth and very good looking.
And but like obviously, like there are different design patterns on both iOS and Android. So Flutter widgets are kind of compatible with those, and are they similar on both platforms, or rendered differently for each of those?
So the beauty of that is you
Like,
can render it differently. So if you
Okay.
want to, for instance, you have a certain widget that you only want to have on the iOS version of your application.
Okay.
You can do that with conditionals. You can check which platform you're working
Okay.
against.
Okay. And then
And you can implement that logic if you want to. But a lot of the design language of, for instance, material design actually translates one-to-one to both platforms anyway. So that's what you can do. And then if you want to theme your app as a Cupertino app on iOS and a material app on Android, we allow you to do that exactly the same way.
Cool. The other question I have, like I had an idea of building some, I don't know, this next kind of voting app or something, or psychological polls app, whatever. This is quite a usual simple example to try some new technology out.
Yeah.
And you can, with this simple example, you can try like the whole flow from building tiny stuff, shipping it through Play Store or App Store, and getting early feedback from people. Is Flutter ready for production right now?
Yeah. So a certain set of features is missing because it's an alpha. So for instance, if you require maps right now, we don't have a maps widget right now. Same goes for video support. But those are obviously things that we are working on. So what I would recommend people is to check out which features we support. Those features we support, they are not alpha quality as in it's bad. It's literally just certain things are missing right now, and they're being worked on our way towards the beta of Flutter. But a lot of the functionality that developers have been asking for, because we have this approach of always getting out to developers, asking them, what can we do to make Flutter work for you, right? We, for instance, have really good support for Firebase. So if you want to integrate the real-time database or you need Firebase authentication, it's all sorted out for you. So it's really, really easy to build apps like a polling app or some other of those apps that people usually go for. And I think that's why Flutter is already ready for a certain set of apps within production level. And a good example of that, for instance, is Hamilton, which is an application that was built for the most popular American musical right now, Hamilton the Show. And it has amazing ratings. It actually even got featured on the App Store on iOS and the Play Store on Google ecosystem, which kind of shows that they can achieve production-ready apps with Flutter already.
Cool, okay. Maybe I know. Maybe we should try writing something in Flutter. And actually, is it complicated to write, to bind existing code? Like if I have this library which works on Android natively, let's say using Java, or written in Java or Kotlin, is it complicated to bind this code to Flutter and reuse this widget somehow?
No, so the beauty is if you want to use native libraries, because that's the one library you really love, or it has some
whole ecosystem
really,
around.
because there's a whole ecosystem around it. We have this feature that we call platform channels. And very similar to Android intents, you can communicate with the Kotlin code or the Java code or about the respective iOS version, Objective-C and Swift. And you can use that. You can, let's for instance, you have this one API library that you want to go for. And then once that native code, Kotlin, for instance, executed, you can pass back the result to Flutter. So you can do that. Or, well, you could obviously write a Flutter plugin for it.
Maybe we should think about that for our SDK. At DevFest, we have people from like all around the globe and from different companies. And quite often, one of the questions which gets asked quite often, how do I join Google or other big company? So how do I join Google?
I think there is not the one way to do it, right? Okay. So what I highly recommend is engaging with Google in a way. So for instance, students often ask me this question, and we have a lot of amazing concepts for students, like Hashcode, which is an initiative like a student coding contest. There is Google Summer of Code that allows you to work on open source projects with us. Obviously, attending DevFest, Google developer groups are a great way to engage with the Google ecosystem and getting to know many Googlers. So references definitely work great, but also applying, that is something that I highly encourage people to do. Show that you actually have praxis experience, like get out there, get your hands dirty, try stuff, get feedback, build something, and that's really what I can recommend people. Just give it a try. And the good thing is, it doesn't hurt to try every now and then, right? So even though you might not be ready at some point in your career, you might be ready at a later stage at your career, right? And I see a lot of people that don't necessarily follow this one clear path from studies to internship to joining Google. Like for instance, I never, like after I finished my studies, after I graduated, I was an Android freelancer. I worked for a bunch of other companies. I was a product manager at some point, then went back into evangelism, and now I joined Google, right? So I feel you don't necessarily need to have that one red path, as long as you show there's a certain story around what you do. And what definitely helps is engaging socially as well, like being somebody who likes to give back, fitting into the culture of Google, which is very much around being a good team player, being engaged, being positive. That is something where I think that definitely helps.
Thank you, Tim.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone over there. Stay tuned for the next interviews. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.